Betrayal, I've learned, doesn't always announce itself with a shout. Sometimes it arrives as a whisper, a scent on the air where it shouldn't be. In my case, it was the unmistakable, sophisticated aroma of Chanel No. 5. It was a classic, iconic fragrance, but it was not my wife's. Eleanor's signature was something lighter, a fresh, citrusy scent from a small boutique downtown that always smelled like sunlight. This was different. This was the scent of late-night dinners in expensive restaurants, of secrets kept in the dark. It clung, like a ghost, to an emerald and gold Hermes scarf, tucked deep in the back of her lingerie drawer, hidden beneath layers of familiar lace. The moment my fingers brushed against the cool, impossibly smooth silk, something cold and sharp twisted low in my gut. It was a visceral, primitive pain, the kind that 15 years in the brutal theater of the courtroom had never prepared me for. My life, my entire career, was built on the bedrock of evidence. As Julian Croft, a medical attorney in Portland, I had built a formidable reputation defending hospitals against malpractice suits. I could dissect a case with surgical precision, find the single hairline fracture in a plaintiff's testimony, and press until their entire argument shattered. I knew evidence, and this scarf, this scent, was evidence of the highest order. It was irrefutable. Tucked into a fold of the silk was a small, embossed gift tag, the kind of expensive detail that screams intimacy. 2 initials were elegantly calligraphed in a confident, masculine script. A.V. The letters burned themselves into my memory. Alistair Vance. In that dizzying moment, I couldn't decide which blade cut deeper. The stark, undeniable fact of the betrayal, or the sickening realization that the marriage I had considered a sanctuary was, in fact, a house of glass, filled with silences I'd mistaken for peace. Our life was a carefully curated portrait of success. The restored Victorian with its wraparound porch, the shared Sunday crosswords that were more ritual than pastime, the comfortable, predictable rhythm of 2 professionals at the apex of their careers. I defended the system. She healed within it. Eleanor was a brilliant, dedicated surgical nurse at the prestigious Westwood Medical Center, a position she had earned with grit and talent 5 years ago. I was immensely proud of her, of the quiet compassion she brought to her work, a quality that had first captivated me a decade earlier when I met her during a hospital consultation. At Westwood, Eleanor worked under the command of Dr. Alistair Vance. To call Vance a local celebrity would be a gross understatement. He was a surgical deity, a king in his own kingdom. His handsome, reassuring face was plastered on clinic billboards across the city. His innovative techniques were fawningly featured in local magazines. He chaired every important charity gala, his name synonymous with philanthropy and medical excellence. An entire wing of the hospital was named after his family. In Portland's tightly knit medical community, Vance wasn't just a doctor, he was untouchable royalty. In the beginning, Eleanor had been starstruck, regaling me with stories of his diagnostic brilliance, his compassionate bedside manner, his inspiring mentorship. I had listened, genuinely pleased she had found a leader she respected. Now, his initials felt like a cattle brand on my wife's secret life. That night, I waited. I feigned exhaustion from a long day in court, observing Eleanor from behind a mask of weary normalcy. She hummed as she tidied the kitchen, her movements graceful, familiar, and now, each one felt like a meticulously rehearsed lie. While she showered, the steam hissing from under the bathroom door like a gathering serpent, I slipped into our darkened bedroom. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird beating itself against a cage. I took her phone from the nightstand. My hands, usually so steady in cross-examination, trembled as I entered the passcode I had seen her use 1,000 times. The messages were there, under a contact saved simply as A.V. My breath caught in my throat, a dry, painful knot. You look gorgeous today in those scrubs. A vision in blue. Can't stop thinking about our conversation in the supply closet. Your wit is as sharp as any scalpel. Dreaming about that Napa trip. 2 days, just you and me. The Pinot will taste better with you. This bracelet is as beautiful as you are. Wear it when we're alone. There were dozens of them, a slow, calculated seduction, escalating from professional compliments to explicit propositions. I scrolled with a sick fascination, my thumbs slick with sweat, desperately searching for her replies, for some sign of complicity or rejection. There were none. No evidence Eleanor had reciprocated his feelings, but also no evidence she had erected a wall, no firm stop. She had allowed his advances to exist in the silent spaces of her life, a secret garden of another man's desire cultivated in the dark. My first instinct was primal, a red wave of rage, confrontation. I saw it all in a flash, storming into Vance's polished office, the deeply satisfying crunch of his perfect nose under my fist. I imagined waking Eleanor, shaking her, the phone held in her face as I screamed the questions tearing me apart. Why? Who is he to you? But the lawyer in me, the cold, strategic engine that had won so many cases, seized control. I played the moves out in my head. A messy confrontation would be a disaster. Vance, with his army of lawyers and his unimpeachable public image, would deny everything. He would paint Eleanor as a fantasist, a liar, or worse, a willing participant who had encouraged his attention and then cried wolf. In the closed, incestuous world of the medical community, a god-king like Vance would walk away without a scratch. Eleanor's career, her reputation, would be incinerated. So, lying next to my sleeping wife, the familiar scent of her shampoo, a painful counterpoint to the ghost of Chanel No. 5 inches my mind, I made a different decision. The hot rage in my chest didn't vanish. It cooled, compressed, and was forged into something harder, sharper. A weapon. This would not be a crime of passion. It would be a meticulously planned, flawlessly executed prosecution. This pompous, arrogant doctor thought he could take my wife. He thought he could invade the sanctity of my life and take what was mine without consequence. I would take everything from him instead. His reputation, his practice, his fortune, his freedom. I would leave him with nothing but the ashes of the kingdom he had built. My war began not with a declaration, but with a quiet, methodical search query in the dead of night. After years defending medical institutions from opportunistic lawsuits, I knew their anatomy. I knew that power and profitability on the scale of Alistair Vance's clinic always left a trail, a faint scent of rot beneath the antiseptic surface. How could a single surgical practice, however prestigious, generate such astronomical revenues? I buried myself in my home office, the glow of my dual monitors painting pale, shifting shadows on the walls, fueled by endless cups of black coffee and a cold, simmering fury that sharpened my focus to a razor's edge. I started with open source data, pulling the publicly available insurance payout statistics that were published annually. For 3 nights, I barely slept, cross-referencing figures, building spreadsheets, searching for anomalies. Soon, a story began to emerge from the numbers. Westwood Medical Center, and specifically Vance's surgical department, received reimbursements for certain orthopedic procedures that were, on average, a staggering 64% higher than the regional mean. The pattern was glaringly obvious and most pronounced with patients over the age of 50 who carried full, top-tier insurance coverage. It was a red flag, but it wasn't proof. To get closer, I needed a more sophisticated approach. Violating HIPAA privacy laws was a line I could not cross. It would mean felony charges and disbarment, ending my war before it had truly begun. I turned to my network. I called a former colleague, Leland, a meticulous, data-obsessed man who now held a mid-level position at the state's healthcare quality authority. I carefully framed my inquiry as preliminary academic research for a law journal article I was considering on billing efficiency in outpatient surgical centers. Just trying to get a sense of regional norms, Leland, I told him, my voice a mask of casual professional curiosity. Leland, who lived and breathed data, was happy to oblige. A week later, he sent me an anonymized, aggregated data set. As I filtered the numbers, my suspicions hardened into cold certainty. Westwood, under Vance's direct leadership, performed an abnormally high number of joint surgeries, particularly complex procedures on Medicare patients, far exceeding any logical statistical explanation. These numbers are definite outliers, Julian, Leland remarked when I called to thank him, his voice laced with professional interest. But they're technically just within the allowable thresholds for a formal review. We flagged them before, but Vance's outcomes documentation is always impeccable. The man is a fortress of paperwork, every I dotted, every T crossed. What about patient complaints? I asked, my tone carefully neutral. There was a pregnant pause on the other end of the line. That's the strange part, Leland said, his voice lowering conspiratorially. There are almost none. For a practice that busy, performing that many invasive procedures, it's statistically improbable. Either he's genuinely a miracle worker, a surgical saint, or, or the complaints never make it to your office, I finished for him, the pieces clicking into place. Leland's slow exhale was almost a sigh of agreement. Wouldn't be the first time a prominent doctor had complaints quietly buried. Vance plays golf with half the hospital board members in the state. He's insulated. This conversation gave me my next target. If complaints were being suppressed, there had to be a human mechanism. My investigation moved from the sterile world of data to the messy human world. I began frequenting a dimly lit pub near the clinic, a place where exhausted nurses and administrative staff often gathered to decompress after their long shifts. Introducing myself simply as Eleanor's husband, a friendly face in the crowd, I bought rounds, listened to grievances about long hours and difficult patients, and waited. One evening, a harried receptionist, emboldened by her third glass of cheap Chardonnay, began complaining about her boss. "Dr. Vance," she sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes. "Oh, he is obsessed with his stats, his precious numbers." "What statistics?" I asked innocently, taking a slow sip of my beer. "Number of procedures performed, percentage of successful outcomes. He demands the figures increase every single month. Especially loves operating on elderly patients with good insurance. He calls them his gilded geese." A few nights later, a nurse from the administrative department, a woman with a perpetually weary expression, was even more forthcoming. "Do you have any idea how many diagnostic procedures we perform weekly?" "It's twice as many as any other clinic in the city, Doctor." Vance calls it thorough diagnostics. But between you and me, it feels like we're just padding bills to justify the surgeries he wants to perform. The real bombshell came from a young medical assistant, her inhibitions washed away by too many gin and tonics. She leaned in close across the sticky table, her breath heavy with juniper. "Between us," she whispered, her eyes darting around the noisy pub, "I've seen Vance alter diagnostic results. A patient comes in with minor, manageable joint pain. Somehow, they leave with 3 complex surgeries scheduled on the books." She let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh. "The man's a magician. Finds problems no other doctor on earth can see." "That sounds dangerous," I said carefully. "Dangerous? It's brilliant. The clinic's annual bonuses are directly tied to procedure volume. We're all getting rich." She raised her glass in a sloppy toast. To Dr. Vance's eagle eyes. "But how does he get past the insurance reviews?" I pressed, genuinely curious about the mechanics of the fraud. "Oh, that's the clever part," she slurred, her words thick. "He's created his own diagnostic markers, Vance's indicators, he calls them. Subtle findings that he documents in a way that technically qualifies for surgical intervention, but are almost impossible for an outside reviewer to disprove from a scan alone. And he has his own imaging technicians who know exactly what to highlight in their reports. Plus," she leaned even closer, her voice dropping to a near inaudible whisper, "rumor is, his brother-in-law is a senior review executive at Blue Shield." "What about patient complaints?" I asked, remembering Leland's comment. Her expression changed instantly, the drunken humor vanishing, replaced by a flicker of fear. "Those disappear, literally. There's a special, off-the-books protocol for any complaint lodged against Dr. Vance. They go straight to Patricia in patient relations. She's been his loyal gatekeeper for 15 years. Most complaints never even get entered into the official system." I felt a profound chill run down my spine, a cold dread that had nothing to do with my own marital woes. This was bigger, darker, and more insidious than I had ever imagined. My personal vendetta was shrinking in the shadow of a vast, corrupt enterprise. Alistair Vance wasn't just a philanderer who had targeted my wife. He was a predator of the highest order, and his hunting ground was the sacred trust between a doctor and the sick, the elderly and the vulnerable. Data, statistics, and drunken whispers were the skeleton of my case, but I needed to give it flesh and blood. I needed human stories, the voices of the victims whose pain was being converted into Vance's profit. To build a case that could withstand the legal storm Vance would unleash, I needed more than numbers. I needed narratives. Chance, as it often does in the course of justice, provided the opening I needed. Playing a perfunctory round of golf at my club, a necessary evil for maintaining professional connections, I was paired with a man named George Parker, a retired literature professor in his early 60s. He walked with a pronounced, painful-looking limp. "New knee," he explained with a grimace as he lined up a putt. Surgery at Westwood a few months back. Dr. Vance. Over drinks in the clubhouse after our game, the air thick with the smell of cigars and entitlement, I gently guided the conversation. Strangest thing, he related, swirling the ice in his scotch. I went in with some mild arthritis pain, the kind of thing you expect at my age. I came out of that first consultation scheduled for 3 separate surgeries. First an MRI, then an arthroscopy, and 2 months after that, a complete joint replacement. Dr. Vance said I had a rare and aggressive form of cartilage degeneration. And how do you feel now, George? I asked, my voice a careful blend of friendly concern. He sighed, a deep, weary sound. Honestly, a hell of a lot worse than before, he admitted, his voice low. Constant aching pain. But the doctor says that's a normal part of the healing process and has already scheduled another cleanup procedure for next month. He strongly advised against getting a second opinion, said it might compromise his proprietary treatment plan. If you ever change your mind and decide you want one, give me a call, I offered, sliding my business card across the table. I know some of the best orthopedists in the state. No pressure, no strings attached, just a professional courtesy. George called 3 days later. His voice was trembling with a mixture of confusion and rage. The second opinion doctor had been appalled, calling the aggressive treatment plan borderline barbaric for what he diagnosed as routine, manageable osteoarthritis. George was my first real case, my first brave voice. Through him, I found others, a small, frightened network of patients who felt deep in their bones that something was wrong but were too intimidated by Vance's godlike reputation to question him. The true breakthrough, however, came when I found Helen Gable. She was a 5'8" retired nurse, sharp as a tack, who had also been a patient of Vance's. She met me at a quiet, anonymous cafe, a thick file folder clutched in her hands like a shield. Something didn't add up from the very beginning, she said, her voice firm and clear, wasting no time on pleasantries. 30 years in nursing teaches you to trust your instincts, Mr. Croft. My physical symptoms didn't align with his dramatic diagnosis. She had done what few patients would dare. She had requested copies of her MRI scans and showed them to a former colleague, a radiologist at another hospital. You know what he said? Normal age-related wear and tear, Helen. Nothing to see here. But Vance insisted on immediate surgery, claimed the risk of my being in a wheelchair within a year was very high. Did you confront him? I tried to, she said, a flash of righteous anger in her eyes. He became condescending, then aggressive. He questioned my understanding of my own body, implied I was being hysterical. He threatened to put a note in my file that I was refusing necessary life-altering treatment, which could jeopardize my future insurance coverage. What she told me next made the hairs on my arms stand up. I knew something was deeply wrong, so I started recording our conversations on my phone. Oregon is a one-party consent state. I'm a nurse. I document everything. She played one of the recordings for me. Vance's voice, the same smooth, reassuring baritone from the clinic billboards, was now laced with a cold, menacing condescension. Mrs. Gable, with all due respect, I am the surgeon here. These subtle indicators in your scans, which you are not trained to interpret, meet the criteria for immediate intervention. If you refuse this treatment and suffer the predictable mobility loss, your insurance provider will be made aware that it was against my explicit medical advice. Is that the outcome you want? Helen Gable wasn't just a witness, she was a warrior. She gave me copies of everything, her falsified records, her colleagues' assessment, and the damning recordings. With her evidence, I knew I could no longer shield Eleanor from the storm I was gathering. The secret was becoming too large, too dangerous to carry alone. That night, I laid everything out on our polished kitchen table, the printouts of Vance's seductive messages to her, the damning statistical analyses, George Parker's conflicting medical reports, and the complete explosive file from Helen Gable. I watched her face as she processed the tableau of deceit, her expression shifting from confusion to shock, then to a wave of silent tears. But they weren't the tears of guilt I had once dreaded. They were the tears of a caged animal finally seeing an open door. They were tears of relief. I didn't know what to do, she whispered, her hands trembling as she picked up a printout of one of Vance's texts. At first, it was just compliments, professional flattery. Then the gift started. When I tried to create boundaries, to pull back, he would hint that he could ruin my career with a single word. He's the chief of surgery, Julian. His word against mine? Did he ever touch you? I couldn't finish the question, the words catching in my throat. No, she said firmly, her eyes meeting mine, clear and unwavering. He tried once, in his office, after hours. He blocked the door. I made it crystal clear that would never happen. I swear to you, Julian, I never encouraged him. But I was so afraid to reject him outright and make an enemy of him. Why didn't you tell me, Eleanor? The raw hurt in my voice was unmistakable. Because you would do exactly this, she said softly, her gesture encompassing the mountain of files, the evidence of my obsessive crusade. You would declare war. And I truly believed he would find a way to destroy us both. You don't understand the power he wields in this city. I slid Helen's file across the table. Eleanor, this is about more than his harassment of you. He is using his position to systematically abuse everyone. You, his staff, and hundreds of patients. And I am going to stop him. Her nurse's eye, trained to see details others miss, quickly scanned the medical records. A new emotion eclipsed her fear. Professional outrage. My God, she breathed, her voice low and furious. These surgeries, they're completely unnecessary. These patients didn't need half of these procedures. This is butchery. A fire I hadn't seen in years lit in her eyes. I can help, she said, her voice gaining strength. I can't copy records. That's an immediate firing offense and a HIPAA violation. But I can note the patient charts and case numbers that fit the pattern you've identified. I see them every single day. Our fractured marriage began to mend, not with apologies, but over encrypted spreadsheets and whispered, late-night conversations. We were a team again, forged in a new fire, united against a common, formidable enemy. But Vance was not a man to be trifled with. As our silent investigation gathered momentum, he must have sensed a change in the currents around him. One evening, Eleanor came home looking stunned, her face pale. Vance just offered me a promotion, she said, placing her bag on the counter, as if it were heavy with lead. Director of Nursing Administration. It comes with a 40% salary increase. I looked at her, and we both understood instantly. It's a bribe, I said, the word tasting like ash, and it's a cage. A golden cage. The position would move her from the surgical floor into a purely administrative role, cutting her off from direct patient care, and more importantly, from patient records. It would undoubtedly come with an enhanced, ironclad confidentiality agreement that would legally gag her. What should I do? She asked, her voice laced with the old anxiety. I considered the strategic implications carefully. You accept it, I said finally, the plan forming in my mind. But you tell him you're honored, and you insist on a 2-week transition period to properly train your replacement. You owe it to the patients, you'll say. That gives us 14 days to gather everything else we need before he locks the door to the armory. The 2-week transition period was a frantic, nerve-wracking sprint. By day, Eleanor was the model of professionalism, diligently training her replacement, her calm demeanor a perfect mask for the turmoil beneath. By night, she was my most valuable asset, my inside source, feeding me a steady stream of patient identifiers, procedural codes, and overheard whispers that matched Vance's intricate pattern of fraud. Our dossier grew thicker by the day, a heavy, damning indictment of a king's corruption. But as we closed in on his throne, the beast began to stir, sensing the hunters in the shadows. The call came on a Tuesday evening, from an unknown number that flashed across my phone's screen. Mr. Croft. The voice was as smooth as aged scotch, confident and utterly unmistakable. This is Alistair Vance. I believe it's time we had a conversation. I think we have mutual interests to discuss. A cold thrill, a mixture of dread and anticipation, shot through me. He was moving his queen into play. Curiosity and perhaps a lawyer's arrogance overcame my caution. I'll be there, I said. We met in a private, wood-paneled dining room at the Reserve, a club so exclusive and steeped in old money, it made my own look like a public park. He arrived precisely on time, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that likely cost more than my first car. He ordered a 25-year-old single malt for himself without looking at the menu and gestured for me to sit, a king holding court. I'll be direct, Julian. May I call you Julian? He began, not waiting for an answer. I know you've been digging around my practice, asking questions, sowing dissent, and I understand. On a certain primal level, I do. If I believe someone were pursuing my wife, I might react similarly. But this has escalated beyond a simple personal matter. Has it? I asked, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. Tell me, Doctor. Vance, do you consider performing unnecessary, life-altering surgeries on trusting elderly patients a personal matter? He smiled thinly, a predator's smile that didn't reach his cold, assessing eyes. Medical opinions differ. What a timid practitioner might call unnecessary, a more forward-thinking one calls comprehensive preventative care. You should know better than anyone that healthcare is a business, Mr. Croft, a very profitable one. He slid a thick, leather-bound folder across the polished mahogany table. Inside is a consulting contract, a retainer for your firm, 2 years, $1 million. Your official role would be to advise us, to help improve our risk management and compliance procedures. All we ask is that you sign a standard, very comprehensive non-disclosure agreement and cease your current, let's call it academic research. You're offering me $1 million bribe to look the other way, I stated, making him say the words. I'm offering you a lucrative professional opportunity, he corrected, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a confidential murmur. And protection. Your career, your wife's career, they're more vulnerable than you think. You've been rattling cages, Julian, and you've made powerful enemies. This is a chance to turn those adversaries into allies. And if I decline? His expression hardened instantly, the charming facade melting away to reveal the cold, ruthless man beneath. Then we will respond accordingly. Your law firm represents 3 of the largest hospital groups in the state. As it happens, I sit on all 3 of their boards. Your wife, as you know, works in my clinic. Your beautiful Victorian home has a substantial mortgage. Your position, Julian, is far more precarious than you seem to realize. I stood to leave, the small, powerful recording device in my jacket pocket feeling warm against my chest. Thank you for making this so easy, Dr. Vance. You've just confirmed everything I suspected. His voice, sharp as a shard of glass, stopped me at the door. Croft, this little recording you're undoubtedly making won't help you. In a courtroom, it will be my word against yours. A respected, beloved surgeon versus a jealous, vindictive husband with a vendetta. Think very, very carefully about your next move. I didn't have to wait long for his. The very next morning, I was summoned to my firm's managing partner's office. 2 stone-faced board members sat with him. Vance had called them personally, accusing me of conducting an unauthorized rogue investigation, of harassing his staff, and of flagrantly violating HIPAA regulations. They placed me on a mandatory indefinite leave of absence, their message clear. I was a liability they were cutting loose. That same evening, Eleanor received a terse call from HR, reassigning her, effective immediately, to the geriatric long-term care ward, a professional dead end, the least desirable post for a top-tier surgical nurse. It was a clear, calculated message, a public shaming. 2 days later, I discovered my credit score had mysteriously plummeted 150 points overnight due to a clerical error that would take weeks to investigate. Then George Parker, my first and most crucial witness, called me, his voice choked with distress. Vance had personally called him, subtly threatening that his insurance provider might be forced to retroactively review and deny coverage for his previous surgeries if he participated in any unfounded investigations. He couldn't risk it. He was out. The final terrifying blow came on a Friday night. We returned home from a late, tense dinner to find our front door slightly ajar, a silent violation. Inside, the house was in chaos. My office had been systematically ransacked. Papers were strewn everywhere, files pulled from cabinets, books swept from shelves. Nothing of monetary value was stolen, but Eleanor's personal laptop was gone. "He's looking for your evidence," Eleanor whispered, her voice shaking as she surveyed the utter violation of our home, our sanctuary. "What if he finds the people we've talked to? What if he hurts them?" I pulled her close, her familiar citrus scent a small anchor in the swirling storm of fear and fury. "All the original documents, all the recordings, are in a secure bank deposit box," I assured her, my own heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This was an act of desperation. And desperate men, Eleanor, make fatal mistakes. But as I looked at the wreckage of my office, at the raw fear in my wife's eyes, I knew with chilling certainty that Alistair Vance wasn't just a cheat and a bully. He was dangerous. He had declared total war, and he had just brought it across our threshold and into our home. The break-in was a declaration, a line drawn in blood. Vance had crossed from professional intimidation into personal warfare. He thought he could terrorize me into submission, that fear would be a more effective tool than bribery. He had fundamentally misjudged me. He hadn't built a legal career by backing down from threats. He thrived on them. If he could leverage his network to isolate and crush me, I would build my own coalition to burn his kingdom to the ground. My first call was to a sharp, ambitious former classmate who now worked in the state attorney general's office, specializing in healthcare fraud. I laid out the broad strokes of my case, carefully, protecting my sources while painting a damning picture of systemic abuse. This is far bigger than one corrupt doctor, I explained, my voice low and urgent. It's a criminal enterprise, preying on the elderly, defrauding the government of millions. She was cautious, a prosecutor through and through, but I could hear the intrigue in her voice. Bring me a case with undeniable, rock-solid evidence, Julian, and my office will be ready to move. Next, I met with Finn, a tenacious, old-school investigative journalist at the Oregonian whom I respected. Over coffee in a noisy diner, I outlined the general pattern I'd discovered, a story of medical hubris and systematic greed, without naming Vance directly. Finn's eyes lit up. If this pans out, if you have the documentation to back it up, this isn't just a story, he said, leaning forward. It's Pulitzer material. It's the kind of story that changes laws. I promised him he would have an exclusive, with every document he needed to verify it when the time was right. My small army was beginning to assemble. But it was Vance himself, in a breathtaking act of supreme arrogance, who handed me the master key to his own destruction. A week after the break-in, a process server arrived at my door. Doctor, Alistair Vance was suing me for defamation, slander, and tortious interference, requesting $5 million in damages. The server looked utterly confused when I began to laugh. It was a deep, genuine laugh of pure, unadulterated relief. This was a desperate, foolish move from a man so insulated by his own power that he couldn't see the fatal flaw in his strategy, the legal process of discovery. A lawsuit is a two-way street. In suing me, he had just given me the legal authority, the subpoena power, to demand access to the very documents he had broken into my home to find. Internal clinic communications, financial ledgers, billing records, emails, everything. His ultimate intimidation tactic had backfired spectacularly, turning from a sword aimed at my throat into a shield and a key for me. My former partners at the law firm, initially content to cast me adrift, now saw the lawsuit as a direct, insolent attack on one of their own. Their professional pride wounded, they agreed to represent me pro bono, eager for a fight. The true turning point, however, the moment the war was truly won, came from the last place I ever expected. An anonymous email appeared in my encrypted inbox late one night. I have information about Dr. Vance, the information you need to destroy him. We arranged a clandestine meeting in a deserted corner of a public library. The sender was Vance's executive assistant of 10 years, a quiet, unassuming, middle-aged woman I'd seen 100 times hovering in the background of clinic photos. She was visibly terrified, her hands trembling, but her eyes held a core of cold, hard fury. He threw me under the bus, she said, her voice a low, shaking whisper. The federal auditors started asking preliminary questions about some billing discrepancies, and he told them I was responsible for the errors. He was preparing to make me the scapegoat. She pushed a small flash drive across the table. I have covered for that man for years. I have looked the other way, but I will not take the fall for his crimes. The flash drive was the smoking gun. It was Pandora's box. It contained years of internal emails, memos, and damning financial reports. There were explicit, sickening discussions between Vance and his surgical partners about their revenue enhancement strategies. One particularly damning email from Vance himself read, "Remember, every arthritic knee that walks through our door is a potential for 3 separate procedures, not one. We are providing a comprehensive service. Do not leave money on the table." They had a name for their vile scheme, a sickeningly cynical phrase that made my stomach turn, harvesting the Medicare field. She had documented everything, every patient he had coerced, every diagnosis he had fabricated, every complaint he had ordered her to bury. It was a complete annotated record of his corruption, compiled by the one person he believed was unconditionally, blindly loyal. Now, I had it all. The irrefutable statistical data, the heartbreaking patient testimonies, the chilling recordings from Helen Gable, the recorded bribe attempt, the evidence of witness intimidation, and now, the internal communications that laid his entire fraudulent enterprise bare. I spent one final, marathon weekend in my disheveled office, preparing for the final assault. I compiled 3 separate, meticulously organized, and cross-referenced document packages. One for the State Medical Licensing Commission, emphasizing the shocking violations of medical ethics and the tangible harm done to patients. One for the Medicare Investigations Department, focusing on the massive financial fraud perpetrated against the federal government. And one for the top 3 insurance companies that had funneled millions into Westwood, highlighting the pattern of excessive reimbursement and deliberate cost inflation. On a cold gray Monday morning, with Eleanor standing by my side, her hand resting firmly on my shoulder, I sent all 3 packages simultaneously via secure courier. It was done. The dominoes were set. The trap was sprung. All I could do now was wait for the first one to fall. The first domino fell with a thunderous, earth-shaking crash that resonated throughout Portland's medical community. Within 1 week, all 3 major insurance companies simultaneously suspended all payments to Westwood Medical Center and launched their own massive internal audits. The financial lifeblood of Vance's glittering empire was severed overnight. 2 weeks later, a team of grim-faced federal investigators from the Medicare Fraud Strike Force descended on the clinic, seizing servers, computers, and entire file rooms of records. The news broke on the 6 o'clock news, followed by Finn's explosive front-page expose in the Oregonian the next morning. Alistair Vance's carefully crafted, decades-long reputation was utterly demolished in less than 72 hours. He tried to fight back, holding a disastrous press conference where he blustered about a smear campaign and a misunderstanding, but his arrogance now read as desperation. When his most prominent patients began canceling appointments in droves and his top surgical partners started quietly circulating their resumes, his confidence finally shattered. His frivolous lawsuit against me was unceremoniously dropped, his own high-priced attorneys withdrawing from the case, citing irreconcilable professional differences. The climax came a month after the investigations began. The State Medical Licensing Commission convened a closed, emergency hearing. The next day, they temporarily suspended his medical license, pending the outcome of the federal investigation. That night, a desperate, raging Alistair Vance called Eleanor, his voice a venomous torrent of accusations and threats. We recorded the entire conversation and passed it directly to the federal investigators as additional, damning evidence of witness intimidation. The weight of the evidence against him was a mountain he could not move. Facing a slate of federal charges that could put him in prison for the rest of his life, Vance finally broke. He accepted a plea deal, a full admission of guilt to medical insurance fraud and witness intimidation in exchange for a sentence of 5 years in federal prison and an agreement to pay full financial restitution to his victims and the defrauded insurance companies. His medical license was permanently, irrevocably revoked. The day of his sentencing, the courtroom was packed with his former patients, elderly men and women with canes, walkers, and the visible scars of his greed. As he was led away in handcuffs, still arrogant and defiant to the very end, there was no applause, no celebration. There was only the quiet, solemn, collective exhale of a community finally seeing justice done. From across the courtroom, Helen Gable caught my eye and gave me a single, profound nod of gratitude. But our battle wasn't truly over. In the months following his conviction, we faced a subtle, insidious backlash. Vance was gone, but his network of powerful friends remained, embedded in hospital boards and professional organizations. I mysteriously lost 2 of my biggest clients. Eleanor, despite her pristine record and years of experience, found it impossible to find a new nursing position. The mere fact of having worked at the now infamous Westwood Clinic was a black mark, a stench of scandal she couldn't wash away. They were making an example of us, a warning to anyone else who might dare to challenge the system. They're trying to shut us down, to erase us, Eleanor observed one evening, looking over another polite but firm rejection letter. Then we'll build something new, I said, an idea that had been quietly growing in my mind finally taking shape. Something they can't control, something they can't touch. What had begun as a raw personal vendetta had evolved into a shared mission. We had seen firsthand, in the most brutal way, how vulnerable patients were, how easily the complex, intimidating system could be manipulated by those in power. We decided to use this forced crisis as an opportunity. We pooled our savings, took out a second mortgage on the house Vance had tried to threaten, and used my legal knowledge and Eleanor's deep medical expertise to create something that had never existed in our city: the Croft Patient Advocacy Center. It was a nonprofit consultation center dedicated to a simple, revolutionary idea: helping patients navigate the treacherous waters of the medical system, empowering them to understand their diagnoses, evaluate the necessity of procedures, and protect their rights. The resistance was immediate and fierce. Loan applications were mysteriously denied. Potential office spaces suddenly became unavailable. But they underestimated our resolve and the community we had unknowingly built. I reached out to the patients who had testified against Vance. Many had received substantial financial settlements from the Victims Fund. 5 of them, led by Helen Gable, became our founding investors. Finn, the journalist, wrote a powerful follow-up series in the paper, highlighting our struggle against the entrenched interests of the medical establishment. Public support surged, forcing regulatory bodies to back down and grant us our charter. We started small, in a cramped office with secondhand furniture, but our work resonated deeply. Within the first year, we had helped over 200 patients avoid unnecessary procedures, saving them and their insurers hundreds of thousands of dollars, and perhaps saving some from a lifetime of pain. 2 years after it all began, I sat on the terrace of our house, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. Eleanor came and stood behind me, wrapping her arms around my shoulders. Our relationship, which had started this harrowing journey on the brink of collapse, was now stronger than it had ever been, forged and tempered in the crucible of a shared righteous fight. "You know," I said, leaning my head back against her, the familiar, beloved scent of her perfume a comforting presence. "When this all started, all I could think about was revenge. I wanted to destroy Vance for trying to take you from me. And now?" she asked softly, her cheek resting against my hair. "Now, I understand it was never really about him. It was about the system that created him, that protected him, that allowed people like him to thrive." I turned in my chair and took her hand, intertwining our fingers. "And we're changing that system, Eleanor. One patient, one case at a time." Alistair Vance would serve his sentence, his name becoming a cautionary tale whispered in the halls of medical schools. But the real victory, the truest victory for me, wasn't his downfall. It was what we had built from his ashes. Vance had tried to steal my wife, to shatter my life, and in doing so, he had inadvertently given us a shared purpose, a mission that healed not only the countless patients we served, but also the deep, jagged wound he had carved into our own lives. The best revenge, I had finally learned, isn't destroying your enemy. It's creating something better, something lasting, from the ruin they left behind. And that was the sweetest victory of all.